So obviously we all know the sorts of things that we need to be working on in our auditions because it's the same with literally any performance. You know, you have to play accurately, you have to play with precision, you have to play with spirit. How do you rank all those things when you're listening to an audition? What takes priority?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. You mean from the point of view of the evaluator?
Mm-hmm.
When I thought that the topic was how to prepare the evaluee. So you want to know how and what is expected from the point of view of the other side of the barrier.
Mm-hmm.
You will be there one day. Just keep yourself remembering how tough it is, right?
Yeah.
But I understand that's okay. So point of views, what you value and what you, would you say the ranking of the values of the expectation of the performance?
Right. I mean, of course, I'm sure it's different for every evaluator.
Well, of course. Music means so many things to so many people, even the same piece.
Right.
With the same conviction. If not, we would be all already replaced by artificial intelligence apps and MIDI performances like you do after you engrave music.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, it's not a recitation, it's a narration. But in any case, I took that in account for evaluation. Okay? Thank you. Next. Anybody else?
Actually, I have a question.
Yes?
Yeah, so like, because someone taught me, like, he's one of my past teachers, and he taught me the preparation for audition and competition and concerts are very different. So someone may play beautifully in concert, but like they may also fail in an audition or a competition. So I wonder, if we need to prepare for any of them, do we need to make an adjustment? And if the audience will have the different expectation for the different situation?
That is a very beautiful question. May I ask you to tell me, when you say audience, you have in mind the non-professional audience, the general audience, or the professional audience of the competitions like juries or evaluators?
I think maybe both, because like but certainly in the competition and auditions, the audience may be more professional, and in the concerts, there's also be some professional audience, but more of them are like public.
Well, in evidence, a concert is without a consequence on short term. And an audition or exam or competition is, since there is a pass or fail. But they don't give yet pass or fail on recitals. It just happens on the career level. But that's life lessons. Anyway, very good question. Thank you. Another one?
I have a question, actually.
Yes, please.
I feel like sometimes what makes people stick out the most is the repertoire they choose.
Yes.
Would you say it's better to choose older repertoire that people might say is more classical, like early classical romantic stuff, or to choose pieces that people may not have heard before to stick out more? And would you say there should be a preference for one or the other?
Wow. How much wisdom is there in these young people? I wish I had a tenth of theirs when I was their age. It's a very, 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 in fact, the three questions so far are questions that have answers in those who ask them. But it leaves me room to develop, nevertheless. Sometimes they always say that you always ask the question that you already know the answer of. But in fact, you can be surprised. Theme and variations. But I like that the depth of the scope of the questions. Shall we continue or should we start? What do you consider we should do, Junhua and Edward?
Yeah, why don't we start with these questions and then go on?
Okay.
Yeah.
So James asked about the point of view of what the listener who evaluates is ranking as important, right? So I think there is one unvariable and some variables. Of course, rightfully, it's a subjective answer. You asked me, I answer you. And all my distinguished colleagues will answer differently. Or similarly, regardless. So I just disclose that. I always think that when I hear a pianist play, I close my eyes, especially these video days, and I try to listen to what is the student saying, the performer, what is the performer saying? The intention, the realization. And I try to stay, but honestly it's not easy, but it's important exercise for the old person as I am, to not stay locked in my, let's say, experience accumulated truths about how it's supposed to be played. And therefore, if it doesn't match my tight funnel of tempo, phrasing, articulation, pedal, rubato, how much tasteless, tasteful to my taste, and if it doesn't match my funnel, then it's easy for me to reject and say it's not good. It's not supposed to be played like that. Too much, not enough. And then I keep, therefore, a very humble opening of my mindset, because I think that the beauty of the written score is that as precise as the notation appears to be, and what do we do with the student? We watch the score together, scrutinizing it over and over and over to try to find that truth that intuitively or analytically we get to. And I find that when a candidate presents the piece under another point of view of presenting the emotional and the intellectual aspect of the piece, I don't immediately say, oh no, they don't understand it. I say, okay, tell me more. And I listen and I start rooting for the person who's playing, saying, oh yes. And then I know by experience that regarding the piece you play, that there will be obstacles. Obstacles. And then this idea of the obstacles becomes obsessive, because all of a sudden the performer is focused by the detail in order to go to the next section, and the repetitivity of the practicing shows off, because all of a sudden you're reliable on an autopilot. But because you play once, the moment it matters, your psychological awareness, your hearing level is so very heightened compared to what you do when you practice repetitively. And it never matches. And oddly, while you play the piece that you practiced over and over, just because you're at the moment where it matters to play it well, in the sense as best as you dream it or you love it, and at this point the piece reveals itself almost like a new piece in some sections. It's almost as if there is another lightning of highlighting of historic monument at night that reveals different contours. And I find that this is the moment where I sense that the student or the candidate is vulnerable. And that is replaced in older age by a certain, no matter what I go through technique. But when you're young, there is one tight path to go through all these obstacles, and if it doesn't follow just like you practice them, something happens and this grain of salt can, let's say, disrupt the whole thing. So yes, as a teacher, we develop a sense of intuition about the inclination of the student toward an interpretational choice. Now, the interpretational choice is really not disconnected from the technique. You're not the conductor that organizes the piece and the musicians who play it. You are the organizer, anticipating the players playing, and inevitably there are moments of attention that is a bit lower attention. And I find that if the prerequisite is to play clean, if the prerequisite is not to have a memory slip, if the prerequisite is to be apparently reliable, in other words, not show off your nervousness if you have any, it becomes the objective alpha and omega. That's it. I played it well. I went through my sections well. Exactly the obstacle course. And the beauty of the story is that all of you are involved in piano playing because music means to you more than something else. In terms of art form or science or curiosity about something, whatever it is. And because of that, you define that you will involve so many hours to try to get better at it. Just because it means to you so much. And so let's say you have technical fault because you're nervous. Let's say shifting didn't go far enough, the bass was missed. Oh, you feel wrinkled. You're like, oh, why did I do that? I never do the mistake in that spot usually. And then you start driving the car, watching in the rear view mirror, observing all the things that happened on the obstacle course. And then the musical aspect of this, of the construction of the phrase, intuitive or counterintuitive in terms of how many bars constructed and all, vanishes. Is like, a beach castle that you build on the sand and the wave comes in. And so the piano is not responding, the acoustic is awkward, your hands are cold. I mean, there's so many reasons, but the point is that despite of all these things that can go wrong, the very initial spark that ended by bringing you to that quest for bettering yourself through music playing of a piece that you play shows. In other words, you show who you are in terms of at which point of your development of musicianship you are, despite of the mistakes. And it doesn't mean that if you play very clean, you mask the musicianship you are, because it would be too easy to explain that as clean or musical. Because that is a logo, that almost a logo, a way of thinking about music reliably is sicher oder musikalisch. And it has been not oder, I'm sorry in German, reliable, secure, or musical. And the or instead of and, oder in German, or und, is really the point of non-return. If you accept that the two feed each other, if you have an ergonomic phrasing, fingering that allows you, according to your morphology, to negotiate a given passage, you will be a little bit more reliable, because by essence, even if it's tough, and God forbid it is, there is a moment of pleasure playing it, in terms of the industry of playing it, the ergonomy. And if the fingering is not that reliable, well, it depends on the section. Sometimes there are sections that no fingering is reliable. But let's say that it has to be a match between your morphology, your physical development of independence of fingers and all what it is that it takes, to be reliable. It's not one element or two, but that is where I think it's so important to always find the consequences and the root reasons. If you're, let's say, everybody knows that when you play a piece you practiced, you know in advance, before you start it, that there will be sections that go by 50-50. Some 80-20, some 100%, thank God, because if not, you'll be constantly stressed. And that is the reason, I think, for which we are nervous, is because when you start the piece, you discover it, then you discover living with the piece, then you memorize it, then you perform it in front of friends or people or teachers in studio class, and you think, okay, now I'm ready. But in fact, it's only when you play it under stress that you start learning it in terms of your lifelong experience with the piece. It's like some instruments, they tell you how they want to be played in terms of the action, heavy, light, or whatever. I think in the same way, some pieces reveal themselves to you as they needed to be played only because you have the experience of playing them. So I would say, in my honest view, it takes at least 3, possibly 4 at least, revisitations of a piece after the initial learning. That, unfortunately, doesn't match the time of a school program. Doesn't, unless you have school programs where you last there for 18 years and you come by in and go back and go in and go back. You have to be effective quickly, and the teacher is stressed to prepare you, and you practice to be ready. But the reality is that the teaching you get is really mostly grains in which will be harvested by your own experience with the piece through your own life and other influences into the piece. So the problem is that, in fact, between the start of the practicing of the piece and playing it for the important audition exam competition, in fact, there isn't enough time for the life experience to be put in. Listen to any pianist who plays a piece, famous as a ballade by Chopin or a very less known piece. You always feel like they're like in complete unity with the piece, like the horseman and the horse, the theater actor and the text. You don't feel as an attendee that there is a gap between the two. You feel like there is osmosis, self-evidence. And you wonder, wow, it's like they wrote the piece themselves. And I think that not everybody needs perhaps 3 or 4 revisitations, but the point is that I don't think under that it feels as filtered through the psyche, through the emotional connection and the intellectual organization of the performance of it. So what do? You play in preparation in front of teachers and friends, or colleagues. You organize yourself to play. And every time you play, you start thinking, if you can record yourself, it's even easier, better, because then you start checking the points. I missed this didn't speak, my bass came too late, I messed up the pedal, why did I rush? Oh my God, the sound's not at all like what I wanted to do. Because in real time you think you are doing what you wanted to do because you're involved in it. You cannot be player and at the same time referee or audience. You are involved. So in order to be sure that you keep the tempo you want, you have to count independently of your playing. Easy said than done. But the point is that you realize this, but after it's better not to think about this way of connecting to the piece only by ear or only by fingers. It's really the awareness of how the piece is developing when you play it. And especially because it reveals itself so differently to your ears as a performer and then your ears as a practicer. So what is the place for the spark or the individual spark of a young pianist in the eyes of the seasoned pianist? Well, I think it's a very important part which the performer doesn't have the awareness of. I think there is always this moment where we know how we love the piece. We know how it's supposed to be played according to our own teachers or our own idols when we were young, and how it evolves through life with us. And then our teaching. Not everybody teaches, but teaching is a learning experience as well, lifelong for the teacher. So it really is, I think, a mix of can you deliver under stress, and do you have this added, but is not objectively definable, that spark. You cannot want to have that spark, you have it. The question is your technique allowing you not to shadow it, or lack of reliable technique? Of course, you listen to many performances of the piece and you realize that there is one path to go through that is your ideal path. And then you end up by sounding like many others by essence. Nobody's allowed to do paraphrase on the first ballade by Chopin. You play the first ballade by Chopin. Ravel used to say, on ne m'interprète pas, on me joue. No interpretation, just play my music. And Stravinsky even often was very upset with performers by saying interpretation that was almost like a dirty word, you know, like it's a betrayal, it's traitors. And I think if a composer, and I've worked with living composers, has a very clear idea of what they want, which is obviously why they notate it. If not, they'll be improvisers, and then that just stays at that level of the beautiful ephemeral moment. But when it's written in stone, so to say, then it can in turn become the meaningful part of somebody else's performance. And I don't think the composer comes with an interpretation. I think the composer has an interpretation that is connected to the way the music came to him or to her. And they should be as much open-minded as the performers' juries to the alterity of the way to approach the piece by somebody else. And because it's inevitably a problem of symmetry or asymmetrical, by essence the younger is considered wrong, not right. That's correct. But when you become old, like all of us become old, the fact that you are in the same flame quest all your life, there is no difference. You face a Brahms intermezzo at 8 or later in life. I think it remains equally challenging because it's so beautiful. And when it's beautiful, you don't want to mess it up. And it's not about you, it's about the piece. So yes, I think that the good thing is that when many people listen to you, they complete their opinion of you. It's like a puzzle. Some will say, it was nice, but you know, it wasn't clean. Some will say, there were some interesting ideas. Too bad it wasn't fully developed into this idea. Some would say, yeah, there's something there, but it's not yet apparent. In other words, it's all about timing. How long it takes you to mature the piece in order to present it, regardless that you're going to evolve in life with the piece and change or evolve in your way of performing it. But you have to give a coherent performance on the moment. And that would be my answer to James about the criterias of the point of view of the listener. Some of the opinions that came to the mind of the listener is also in Alphonse's question about preparation, different type of preparation between concert, competition, or audition, and then how the audience is perceived by the event, I guess, that you present. By essence, if it's a concert, there is not somebody else playing right away. Perhaps you can share a concert, but even so, like an audition of students of a studio, everybody brings their best, but there's no ranking. And by essence, when you do an audition or a competition, the problem is that there is a yes-no or a ranking. And that heightens the awareness, since all of you bathe in performances on the internet, that you want to be quote-unquote perfect. And I think that the problem very often is that in order to reach a reliable quote-unquote perfection, you have to disconnect from the musical drive. The analogy for me is obvious with Ulysses, or Odysseus as they call them in this country, when crossing the island of the mermaids, so tempting, he asked to be tied to the boat so that he doesn't succumb to temptation. Well, the analogy for me is that you play a beautiful piece of music, and despite how you prepare it for the industry of playing it reliably, it moves you. It's just so meaningfully beautiful. And if it didn't, then you wouldn't be a musician in the first place to play it. So you have to be able to build that kind of separation, compartmentation between the making, the playing, and the piece itself. It's almost as if you disconnect your ears and you only play by muscular memory from the tips of the fingers, because you don't want the music you produce of the piece you play to overtake you. Of course, you can argue that repetitive preparation slowly evaporates the initial love affair with the piece. That's possible, but not fully. There is always a section or two that, goes so well for, I go like, oh God, I love that section. And so the problem is to be able to manage it, not ignore it. So it's a level of concentration, and I think that the best solution for that, in order to be expressively musical while reliably technical, therefore managing the audition as well as the concert, is to practice the details in the practice room and tell yourself before you go on stage to play, when it matters, that's why I prepared for that. But now it's time to deliver. I want to be with the piece. I want to be with my horse if I'm a horseman. I want to be with the text if I'm a theater actor. I want to be with the love of my life if I'm marrying, because I believe in something that's a couple. And I think in a way you and the piece are a couple. And you and the piano should be also a unit, despite of all the fears and all the worries. And fearing to go through is fear itself. So I think you should have stress, anxiety, all kinds of nervousness before you play, as much as you want. Throw up backstage, say, I don't remember the piece, my God, how does it start, the first notes, what is it? Okay, this is very natural, it happens to so many. As long as once you walk on stage, You start the narration of the piece from the beginning, regardless how you know to do it by sections, and you let yourself be guided. Walk the dog with the leash. Sometimes the dog will pull you to go faster than you want it. Okay. It didn't go like you planned, this section. It's okay. Remain open-minded, think ahead. Don't start regretting the little things that went wrong. Of course, it's easier said than done. So many people start, and it could be a great performance of the piece despite of that. Of course, in concert, everybody laughs. In competition, everybody cries. So, if the reliable fingering is to play it with two hands, then you could say, yeah, but I like that gesture. So reliability is not in the gesture, reliability is in the intention.
That's worse than da-da.
Yes, it's worse because it changes the music.
Oh,
It does, I agree, it does. It does change the music so badly. And that's why I think it's important, in my opinion, that the young people, despite of what happens and the unexpected, keep always at least one music phrase ahead. And don't deal with what went wrong on the spot. Of course, the problem very often between an audition difference and the competition is that a competition could have several rounds. An audition is usually one round. So what matters in a competition is to be reliable every round. And usually the performer who demonstrates through several rounds control of oneself usually prevails, because in this obstacle course, no matter what, some fail and some continue. And I think the competition is a marathon, and the audition is a sprint. You run 1 to 100 meters, the fastest, and that's it. But if you run 10,000 meters, you have to plan strategically your effort. And so the good thing about the audition is that you use your fuel jet right away at the get-go. You have to convince them at the get-go, right away. There is no strategic thing. I'll do it better at the recap, it'll be my redemption, because you might be stopped before. But when you play a competition and everybody plays very cleanly, it makes you very, very worried if you don't. And this criteria becomes obsessive, understandably. And I think that it used to be that the performances on stage, until at least World War II, were happenings that everybody just enjoyed being part of. And the mishaps were not erased, but they're expected or part of. But I think the recording industry developed with those edits the capacity of many people to play clean beyond the meaning that they put in the piece. And so in order to be distinguished, you have to play the meaning of the piece and be clean. So some people don't have the psychological nerves to withstand such a pressure. You've all seen tennis games where the players do aces in their serves, and they get to the 5th set, tiebreaker, and all of a sudden they cannot pass the ball over the net. It's just the human factor. So some manage better their nerves than others. Is it a question of practicing? In part. Is it a question of mind organization for each section? I like to say that I like the student to write down on the score for each section what they want to reach and how they're going to reach it. Because very often what happens is that you start the piece, another section comes in, and very often one adjusts, adapts as it goes. But if at the get-go you know exactly which disposition works better for this or that shifting or that, whatever it is, you have a real-time awareness of what you have to do in order to go through this. And sometimes, if you're not ahead of time in your mind prepared with your gestures, then the adjustment on the spot is always breaking glass. You know, you enter in a porcelain shop with a big backpack and you run. So there is chances you're going to break something in order to go through. But if you always enter in each section with the gestures that you muscularly, memorily prepared in the practicing, chances are you'll go through even when you're nervous. And so I think it's best not to just do it on muscular memory, but to have an awareness what you have to be preparing for. I give you an example. It's very often the case when you start playing a piece that has a fetched bass. It seems like nothing when you practice it, but because you're nervous, your muscles are tense. And usually the shifting lands always that little note before the real note. And it's like as if, because you're fearing, like human, like how we are, when we have a scare, we do this. And so very often we arrive on stage a bit tense. So what is easy to shift in practicing becomes very difficult. And you have to break the ice one or the other, even if you're warmed up. And I think it's the best thing is to allow extra time to touch, prepare, and play a distant note, at least in the beginning, until you get confident that you are in your performance. Oh yes, you won't be in tempo. Oh yes, that note will be too late. But it might be in tempo but wrong note. By itself it might be not a big deal, but it becomes a big deal for you, and then it destroys your capacity to concentrate ahead because of that. So that's why I think it's important to be practicing the shiftings away from the tempo in which you play. In other words, whatever tempo you have to play, or you wish to play, and you have to fetch some bass note, they're often very far, in the left hand especially, then you have to be able to shift faster than the tempo in order to touch that bass note before you play it. Not only because to be the right note, but also the way you can shape it musically. And if it takes a nanosecond to do that, and it adds a rubato, which perhaps musically is questionable on the spot, I still think it's a very sound advice, because the more you perform reliably, the more you build confidence. And nothing beats confidence. That's why the fingerings are confidence, the shifting is confidence. Nothing that is heard, everything that is anticipated and in between builds confidence. The famous idea, no matter what, I'll go through. Instead of, oh my God, I have one chance to go through, but the alignment of the planets has to be perfect for me to go through the coda of the fourth ballade. In fact, very often what happens, I'm sure most of you young people know that, is that the sections you fear the most paradoxically go easy. And then your mind gets so relaxed at the section where usually everything goes well, and when the unexpected mistake happens where you've never made a mistake, then you start getting angry at yourself during the performance. Oh, why did I do that? I never did it there. So that's why I was saying earlier about the many revisitations of the performance, is that imagine that the piece is a garden that you have to mow the lawn, and you do squares, and you do this, and this. So if you perform it many times, and you mess up in each place that you haven't messed up, at some point you've messed up everywhere. And what you learn from each messing up is how to avoid it next time. Despite what you're told wisely by the teachers, because it's just you who have to organize it. And of course that reliability comes from the fact that you know, hey, now I know that no matter what happens, I'm gonna go through. And that then liberates your musical instincts in your analytically planned interpretation to structure what you play in real time. Even if it's ephemeral construction, but it's a construction nevertheless. And I find that what is very difficult is when a candidate to a performance starts a piece which starts in a moderate or slow tempo. I find that to be deadly. There's nothing more difficult than to start because you feel like, okay, I'm going to start with this because it's not too fast, it's comfortable, I'll just warm up into it. And in a way, it doesn't work. Or worse, I'm going to start with the Bach. And why I say that is because if there is a fugue, and you start with a piece that has a fugue, and you're nervous about playing, the polyphonic hearing evaporates. And all of a sudden, it's very dangerous. But if you play Bach as a second or third piece in an audition, once you've broken the ice with another piece, I think it's more reassuring. At least that's how I experience as a teacher. But that said, the reason for all this is that we are reasonable animals. But we are animals. We have passions and anxieties and drives, and in a way, the beautiful moment in the performance is when you stop fearing, and with organized, through technique, control, touch control, you let the horses go. And of course, it's easier to play. Well, it's never easy, but if you start with this, you break the ice in the first bar. You have to shift, organize, shift, organize, shift, organize, shift, organize. And so, by the motoric energy that it takes, the industry of playing, you already broke the ice because your mind is constantly ahead to not miss this, this, and that. But if you start with a piece that is mildly not too fast, your mind starts floating. And the piano has decay, of course we're in denial, but regardless, acoustics, resonance. And in this kind of, between slow and slower, or slowing, fast and rushing, there is always this kind of middle ground. And I find that it's so important to know how you count as a conductor, but playing conductor, the structure of the piece in terms of the traction of the pulse when you perform a tempo that's not fast. If you count it in 2 or in 4 or in 3 or whatever it is, let's say you start 90. Okay, or you can argue it's fancy. That's how it came to me, right? The piano this, the acoustic that, and I was nervous. But if you're a conductor, what do? Since you cannot play anyway, you have them playing, you give an upbeat, which should be equal to the downbeat. And they play on the beat. So I've never or rarely seen a pianist going, other than in their mind. And if they don't do that, they just start the piece because it starts. They've practiced it so many times, you don't even think it is in 3/4, in 3/8. And I think that for tempi that are not fast, it's important to have a sense of the traction by the counting. And the main difference with the performance in concert is that in a concert you don't really concentrate on who hears you. You play for this group of people, and thankfully pianists don't face the audience like singers and don't turn their back to the audience like conductors. Therefore, we have some kind of a peripheral vision fear. What if there is a predator on my right side? Or when you drive the car in the blind spot, is there any car? Can I change lane? And the fact that they're on the side and you're like this, I think the visual contact can be disturbing. Avoid it. And even if you can focus by concentration to be in your bubble, something will distract you. And in a way, I think that's the beauty of a concert, is that, let's say the first piece didn't go very well because you're nervous. The second piece, you start getting more comfortable. After intermission, if there is, the third piece really flows. Then usually the big piece that you left for the end comes in once you've gone through all this experience, and all of a sudden it really blossoms. Regardless of the defects, at least you are fully in. And usually the best part of the performance of a program in a recital are the encores, if there are any. Because you feel like you're relieved from having gone through the obligation, even if self-imposed. And somehow the encore is the moment that is closest to an improvisation, even if it's not. Closest to, I don't have any more to be so worried about messing up. I don't have to be convincing. As they say, when you write a letter, for those of us who are from the generation where we wrote handwritten letters, read first the postscriptum. That's where the letter's point is there, at the end, the last line. And very often we prepare towards it by writing argumentations or whatever. So same thing happens with the concert. You reach the point where the encore is where you're the most liberated from the fear of messing up. So ideally you should start with the dessert and say, hey, I'm going to start with the encores, and then I'm going to go into the piece. The problem is that no matter what, you have to break the ice, and there is no reliable piece to break ice. And I think that the beauty of the concert is that it allows you, if you take the repeats, or even if you don't, through the form of the piece, you have time to enter into the mood of the sections. If you play an audition and you have to be right away there, it's harder. Especially if you're stopped and you're asked to play another movement or another piece right away. Oh yes, you hear it in your head. I'm not going to play right away. I'm going to sing it to myself because I want to enter in it as if I was there. Merge in traffic with the piece, but you haven't played it yet, but you already played in your head. The worst is that the preceding piece that you just played plays in your head rather than the next piece. And so it's a cacophony in your head. You hear your preceding piece still playing, echoing in your head, and you have to start the next piece over it. And it's like, I need more time, but you have no time. And so I think mostly the competition analogy is the capacity of running a marathon, and the audition is a sprint, and I think the concert is a series of marathons. And sometimes you thank Schubert for this extensive recapitulations, because it gives you a chance for redemption. Because you feel like, it just didn't go like I wanted it. The transition to the second theme, and the way I wanted it to be simple and beautiful, but also with all the details. And all of a sudden you feel more warmed up after the development. So when a piece has such a long spreading of its expressive thematic materials, it gives you a chance to enter in the narrative aspect of the piece. And that is usually the concert. And I think that ultimately, what do people remember from a concert? They don't remember the wrong notes. They remember having lived a moment, shared on life moment, with somebody who brings them to a closeness with a piece that they love to play or hear, regardless how they access it. And even years after, I idealize concerts I attended. And perhaps hearing the recording, if there was made one of, might break that idealization. But I don't like that. I like to stay in that moment where you go to be in awe. Because you love the piece and you say, oh my God, this performance was amazing. Perhaps I'll never be able to play like this, but this is how it's supposed to be. That's how I love it. Oh my God, this is amazing. And when it's alive, it's so inspirational compared to a recording, because in the recording, you always know it's doctored, regardless, if it's more or less edited. But in the performance, the performer takes the risk to go through it. Unlike the painter, the paintings don't fade the next day before you reopen the gallery. You don't have to repaint them every morning. They're there. But the performance is every day, every time, every hour. You rebuild the piece from scratch, and that makes you very nervous, because you feel like at some point you're discouraged. God, never goes how I want it. How come for the others it's so easy? They're always so clean and so right and so everything. And when I play, and I think that if really sports people are valued by audiences because they value the intensity and the character and the concentration of a tennis player, for instance. But they don't value equally what it takes to perform a piece. Oh, they're playing the piano. Oh, they're enjoying themselves. It seems vain. But in fact, it's nothing more beautiful than in human condition to better yourself. Your hearing, your touch, your capacity to organize your thoughts. I think if the general audience knows how much it takes character to build up in order not to give up, I think they would be more respectful. But the problem is that less and less audience members today have been amateur pianists when young. Whenever the audiences of before World War II were basically amateur pianists who want to hear the piece they love. I wanted to hear Kempf play Waldstein, I want to hear Rubinstein play this Barcarolle by Chopin, because I also toyed with it. And it gives us some kind of awareness that they are, of course, at a higher level, but it's a kinship. And I think that today, because lesser people play the piano in an amateur level, So therefore they cannot always appreciate the subtleties of an inner voice, of a pedaling difference, of a rubato here or there, or the ornament on the beat or before the beat. Yes, you can argue that all these are unimportant details, but I think that somehow, today, if somebody plays well, it's considered natural. And the difficulty of the subtleties that they present, if they do, are often not even understood or heard. You know, nobody goes backstage and says, "My God, I loved the secondary voice of your contra subject." Nobody. Not because they didn't hear it, but probably they don't even relate to it. But if they played the piece, and they play double trill in the barcarolle, they go, "My God, your double trills are amazing." And if you don't know how to play double trill or what it takes to play double trill, you go, "That was good. Man, that was good. Played double trills." Yeah, of course. No, why not triple, you know? There's no connection to effort and result because you don't have personal experience. Once you decontextualize the piece from its original setting, where it happened, when it happened, and after what happened, and you just take it totally like a lonely planet in the universe, it shines by itself, perhaps differently than in the contexts that when it was written. And if we don't teach the students the sense of style, to understand the philosophy behind the art and the expression given a certain civilization of Western Europe, one can open the focus or close the focus, but nevertheless one has to be aware where it comes from. It's not just notation of pitches and rhythms. It is, but not only. And I would like to just take a second to answer completely Christian's question about the repertoire for audition. I've noticed that some people are advised when they're young to play a very difficult piece for an audition, supposedly harder than the level of the audition if you're BM and you play Schumann, a Liszt sonata, but you really can't. But because you play a harder piece, they think, hey, they'll take me more seriously. And so some people, when I ask students, would you like to play a Mozart sonata? Oh, no, I don't want to play Mozart sonata. Because everything is so in the open. But if I play the Rachmaninoff sonata, if I have the fingers for it, the first movement, I feel like more comfortable because there's more stuff going on. So a Scarlatti sonata reveals more the weaknesses than a more complex piece in terms of texture. But the problem often is that to find the right repertoire for your capacity of performing it, for the expected level of the audition degree, if it is in a school, it's really very important. You don't want to play harder and you don't want to play easier. Nothing is easy, but you don't want to appear in the choice of the repertoire. If you have the choice to, it's not only with, pieces that are obligational. Let's say you have the choice. You don't want to appear to play things to avoid things. I'm going to play the Caesar Franck this, I'm going to play the that. And some people will say, but I want to hear some meat. I want to hear, Opus 1, number 10. And inevitably, it's a difficult balance between classical or romantic you mentioned. I'm not so sure it's the style. I think it's the fact that some pieces are considered less prone to interpretational disagreements among people who listen to you professionally. For instance, if you start with a G major book 2, it's very difficult to disagree. Unless you go the jeu inégal of a harpsichordist or so. But if you play C sharp minor and you go, or you go, or you have to sign your phrasing. You have to sign your legato. You have to sign the direction. You have to. So therefore, you take a more in charge what you want to and how you want to go from point A to B. And if it's something that is more apparently mechanical, not that it is the right word, but let's say motoric, it's more, you're more on tracks. And if not, you have to sort of build your tracks in the sand, and you have to make sure that you hold on them. That's why I was saying earlier, it's trickier to start with a movement that is moderate tempo. And I agree when you mentioned about students playing the Berg Sonata with those sudden changes of tempi constantly, those bursts, virage wie möglich. It's almost like license to go extreme. But in fact, it's not the more extreme that's most convincing. And sometimes the perception of the student of what is the musicianship that they convey in the performance is not the perception of the listener. Like, what is musical is to play a tension release without an accent at the release, except if you want to go further in the phrase. So if you do, and then, intuitively you do tension release, but then he wrote it in 6/4. Why not in 3/4? So you can think, okay, if I don't diminish to go all the way to the end of the 6th beat is perhaps a hint in the and I'm not sure of it, but I think it could be a hint in the notation that you don't want to succumb to the intuitive tension release, but you want to build the phrase going further. Then the tempo takes care of that, and the phrasing, etc., etc.